Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my stream here on the Adobe Creative Cloud channel. My name is Terry White, Worldwide Design and Photography Evangelist for Adobe. It's my pleasure to be streaming to you live here from Atlanta. Welcome. We're going to be talking about a topic that I get lots of questions on all the time, where I kind of see, people doing things that maybe they could be doing a different or better way. And that's basically when to use Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign. In other words, most people usually learn one of those applications first. I mean, that's just human nature. And you gravitate to the one you really like. And then you end up doing everything in that application because it's the one you know. And again, there's nothing wrong with that other than when there's something wrong with that, meaning that just because it's the tool you know doesn't necessarily mean it's the best tool for the job. Hello, Ewan. Thanks for joining me. Hello, Lynn. Thanks for joining as well. And hello, Jan and Natalie and everyone coming into the chat. And glad to see you here. And Natalie, glad that you're a fan. All right, so we're going to be taking a look at Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign. I'm going to show you some things that they do that the other two don't do. We'll just cover some of the things that make people want to use one over the other and tend to use one more than they probably should. If I had to go back in my history of learning the applications, I would say that I probably learned, and that's going to sound weird, even though it's not 100% true, I learned InDesign first. And I say that only because I didn't really learn InDesign first as much as I learned page layout first. I started way back in the PageMaker days, then Quark Express, then InDesign, and I picked up, actually I take that back. Before that, I even learned Illustrator, but I was learning PageMaker and Illustrator at the same time. So I still stick to, I learned page layout first, then Illustrator, then Photoshop. So I learned Photoshop actually last, but nowadays, since I'm doing more photography and image editing, I'm using Lightroom and Photoshop more than the other two combined. So it really depends on which one you started with, but more importantly, which one's the best one for the job. You use Photoshop and Illustrator randomly on various projects. That's great. And hello and welcome from the UK, or welcome UK. And great, glad having so many of you here. No InDesign and Photoshop, still realize that I'm doing everything in Photoshop. Yeah, again, and this is what I was saying earlier. People tend to stick with that one application they know inside and out, or they're learning and they're spending most of their time in. And so when it comes time to do a job, that's the first application they pick up, whether or not it's the right application or not. So without further ado, let's jump over to the computer. And here's what makes this a little bit more challenging. Because all three applications, Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, they absolutely have some overlap. They absolutely can do many of the same things. So depending on what it is you're doing, you could probably do it in all three. You could do, for example, I could design a page like this in Photoshop. I could absolutely design a page like this in Illustrator. And I could absolutely design a page like this in InDesign. So which one is the right one? Well, again, it depends on what else you need. So, for example, let me just create a new document. I'm here in Photoshop CC. I'm going to go ahead and create a new document. As soon as I find my mouse there it is. I'll create a new document, and I just want to show you a couple of things in the new dialog. So one of the things that makes this even, that kind of blurs the lines more between the three applications is that Illustrator got it first, and then Photoshop got what are called artboards. So because both Illustrator and Photoshop have artboards now, that even makes people do more things in Photoshop and Illustrator that they probably would be better off doing maybe in InDesign. Now, we call them artboards for a reason. Although they work like multiple pages, they're really not intended to be multiple pages. So for example, here I'm in Photoshop and I'm telling it to create a 1920 by 1080 document. I'm telling it to use the artboard feature. So when I click create, what it does is it puts that artboard name up there, which of course is artboard 1 until I change it. And more importantly, it's going to put everything that's on that artboard in a layer group called artboard 1. So if I zoom out a little bit, and I go to the artboard tool, I can click and create another artboard, and another artboard, and another artboard. I can create as many artboards as I want or as my computer will allow. And so therefore, I could put one design on one artboard, another design on another artboard, another design on another artboard, and that's what they're for. That is what artboards are for. But when you start thinking about using Photoshop to lay out a brochure or a book or something that's got tons of pages, then you're causing yourself extra pain. And that's just, you shouldn't be doing it that way. So for example, let me just, while I'm here, let me show you a couple things about artboards. Because a lot of people are still don't know that artboards even exist. So when I click on an artboard name, first of all, I get the ability to add artboards around it. Also, I get the ability to change it from just the random sizes that I was dragging out to defined sizes. So you'll notice that all of these, if you look at the presets here, all of these are screen sizes for a reason. All right, so for example, let's say I was going to design a screen for an iPhone 6 Plus. That will automatically give me the right size to do something for an iPhone 6 Plus. We're going to do something for maybe something a lot larger, like a Microsoft. I saw one in here earlier. Microsoft Surface Pro 3. That's going to give me the design for I thought it would be bigger. Surface Pro 3, so forth and so on. So you can either type in your custom page size, or artboard size, I should say, or pick one of the presets. So in this particular case, this artboard was 1920 by 1080. This one I drug out manually. So if I wanted that one to be 1024 by 768, I've just made it 1024 by 768. So you can make artboards any size you want, put anything on them you want, and away you go. Even though you can do that, and that's a cool thing to do for design and mock-ups and prototyping, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do when it comes to creating layouts. So it really depends on what you're going to do with those artboards. So I see a couple people in the chat. Hey, Victoria. Hey, Jason. Who else did I see pop up there a minute ago? I saw Jan earlier. And Michael. Welcome, everyone. So let me close this artboard document and let's get into some of the things that Photoshop is good for. Some of the things that only Photoshop can do and the other two don't do. Now, Photoshop, for those of you who are brand new, is a pixel editing program. That's what it's for. It was always and has been from day one back in the 90s, a pixel editing program. So it's the ability to change the look and feel of pixels, to take an image from the background, for example. Now, although it's evolved over the years and you can put multiple documents inside of other documents, and you can create artboards, you can work with text, and you can do all those things, that doesn't make it a layout tool. But what it is strong at are things like this. So for example, if I double click on this part of the document, I get to a multi-layered file that was embedded inside of it. Now, I've already started some of the work on this multi-layered file. So for example, I'll notice here that I've added some text, added his name going across, but I kind of want that magazine look to it where he's standing in front of the type. And the only way to really make that happen effectively is to cut him out so that he's in front of the type and the type is going behind his head. So I've got another duplicate of that original background on top. So that way I've got the background, the type in the middle, sandwiched in the middle, and that layer on top. Now, of course, there are dozens of ways to cut an image out from the background. But this particular image makes a great use of a feature called select based on the focus area. So in other words, it's got shallow depth of field. You can see him in focus. The buildings in the background are out of focus. Photoshop can now see that. So when I go to my select menu and I choose focus area, it will basically automatically create a mask based on what's in focus. And so right now it's giving me a preview on white. I can say, show me that preview on let's do it on layers. That way we can see it. Or I could show it on black. And if I show it on black, I can see, well, while it did cut it out, it didn't really do that good of a job, meaning there's more work to do. So one of the things I can do, let's Let's go back to on layers. One of the things I can do is, even though I started with that selection, and I can change what's in focus and what's not, more importantly, it's got select and mask built in. So this used to say refine edge until we added select and mask, and now it says select and mask. So that will take me over to the select and mask workflow where I can finish the work. Now, it doesn't look bad right now because the other background is still behind it. So actually we could get away with it, but let's go ahead and clean it up. Let's go in first and foremost. I usually turn on Smart Radius. We'll increase that radius, Smart Radius, just a hair. And what that will do is soften up the edges around hair and harden the edges around his sweater and jacket and things like that. The next thing I want to do is I want to use the refine brush. We'll make that brush a little bigger. There we go. And what that will help me do, there we go, we'll clean up the area around. As remember how jagged his hair was before? And so, for example, we'll see that in a minute. I'll just go in and kind of just clean that area up around the hair. And I already saw some of the type come through just by doing that. And of course, same thing down here. This is getting a little weird. So let's go ahead and we can also bring that back in if we choose. So let's go ahead and just clean that up a little bit, make the brush a little bit bigger, and we'll bring back in that sweater that was being chopped up a little bit and clean that up and go back to our refine brush and just kind of refine that one little piece out just a little bit better. Okay, so now if we look at that on black again, that gets a lot better. We're still not there yet, but I can continue working on it here. So for example, I can go clean that up a little bit more and go clean this edge up a little bit more if I choose. Actually, I kind of like it better the other way. So let's do it with a brush. Just clean that area up just a hair. There we go. Getting around the edge. And of course, you would take your time, zoom in, do a really good job of this, but you get the idea. All right, so now, again, we can show that on layers. Dun, 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 dun. There we go. And now that we've got that in place, I can output that and still continue to work on it if I choose to. So we'll output it as a new layer with a mask. Now, once I've done that, I've still got the type layer and the move tool, and I can move that around and even see it through the hair and see how good of a job that is doing all the way around. And if I still needed to fix something, I still have the original mask to work with that to clean that up just a bit. Those are the kinds of things flat out InDesign can't do. Illustrator, even if you tried to do it with masking, would be very, very difficult, if not impossible to do. And that's a perfect job for Photoshop. That's what Photoshop's for doing things that you are going to need to do at the pixel level to an image that neither of the other tools can do. So when it comes to editing photos, cutting photos out, adding special effects, filters, things like that, whether you do it non-destructively or destructively, those are the kinds of things that Photoshop can do. Now, let's switch over briefly and head over to Illustrator. So here I am now in Illustrator CC. And Illustrator, the biggest difference between Illustrator and Photoshop is Illustrator often, or is more often used for vector work, even though, yes, you can put vectors now in Photoshop. Photoshop doesn't have anywhere near the drawing capabilities of Illustrator. Illustrator is a vector drawing tool with all kinds of tools for drawing, like perspective grid, like the shape builder tool for combining shapes together, the width tool for creating variable widths on your path, so forth and so on. Those are the kinds of things that Photoshop just can't touch. It doesn't have anywhere near the tool set for doing this kind of work. So for example, I want to just show you some of the improvements, even if you don't draw, that have been done along the way to make drawing a lot better. So here's what I've done so far. I'm on a blank layer. I'm using a white stroke. I can actually use no fill, but I'm going to use a white stroke, and I'm going to switch to a tool that many of you probably, if you ever used it, you used it once and you forgot about it and you never wanted to use it again because it was so bad. And that tool It's actually now become one of my favorites. It's the pencil tool. Although the pen is great for doing Bezier curves and perfectly mathematical curves, it's hard for beginners to grasp how that tool works. I've got videos on it. There's a video here on the Creative Cloud channel that Paul Tranny did on how to use the pen tool. I've got videos on the pen tool. But when you show that to a beginner, they're just like scratching their head. I don't get it. I don't understand why it works that way. And is it a great tool for what it does? Yes. Is it an easy to learn tool? Probably not. So here's a tool that is easy to learn because it works like your finger or your pen, but most people don't like it, and I'll show you why most people don't like it. Let's switch over so where you can see my canvas here. I'm going to switch to my stylus. So I'm even going to give it best case scenario. I'm going to use the pencil tool. I'm going to try and draw a path that's like the shape of her hair down at the bottom there. So vector path, here we go, using a stylus on my Cintiq. I'm going to do the best I can. Here we go. And you look at that line, you pause for a second, you delete it, and you never use that tool again. Because the results are so bad. In other words, it's too much like what I did. In other words, everywhere I paused, everywhere my hand shook, it put a point down, it put a pause down, it put a path down, and it's just not a smooth line. So that way, that's the reason why people hit delete immediately or undo, and they never use that tool again, because for many, many, many years, it was that bad. So pencil tool, people just wrote it off, never used it. However, pencil tool got some new life a couple versions ago. If you double click on the pencil tool options, you can go from fidelity accurate, meaning do every little hesitation and every little notch I do, or basically it will suck, to smooth. This is what you really want, and you will never go back to accurate again. I can't ever think of a reason why I would put it back on accurate. But anyway, let's go in now. Just basically use the same tool, change the setting, and now we're going to do the same thing. Here we go. Best I can. Look at how much smoother that line is. There's no jagged. It's half or one tenth the amount of points. And even if I need to adjust it, I can, because I've got those points to make the adjustments. And also, even though Photoshop's pencil tool is back in the 90s, you still have the ability to even create that variable width. So I can have it be thin and thick along the way based on that variable width tool that we have in Illustrator. So for people that are doing drawing, vector art, resolution independent, I can use, I can use type, but I can use any way of drawing that I like. I can make this happen and use any colors and any formats and 24 tools for drawing. That's where Illustrator comes in. Now, Illustrator, Photoshop, really about the same level of learning, meaning you will never really learn both tools to their fullest, like you will always be able to learn something new. But I don't really look at one as being that much harder than the other. I think it really depends on your background. For people that like to draw, Illustrator is probably easier. For people that don't like to draw, Photoshop's probably easier. So it just really depends on what you're doing. Now, again, if I do new document, I just hit Command N. I get that same ability, although even Illustrator lets me create my artboards on the fly. So I just said, give me 5 artboards, create, and there are my 5 artboards. So this is why a lot of people tend to want to do full-blown designs and page layout and brochures and all kinds of things in Illustrator, because now they've got the ability to do those artboards. And yes, your artboards can be different sizes and custom sizes. But that doesn't make it a great layout tool, even though, yes, it can do layouts. Just like it doesn't make it a great photo editor tool, because it can't really do a lot of photo editing. And just like Photoshop's not a great vector drawing tool, because it doesn't have a lot of drawing tools. So it depends on what you're trying to do. Now let me show you one more advantage. Since a lot of you are getting into touch-enabled devices. So I've got again, I'm on my Cintiq here. Before I switch off of it, let me switch to a tool that we introduced an Illustrator a while back called the Touch Type tool. And this is a tool that lets you design with type based on your touch. So let me turn on touch on the display and now touch the letters. And here I'm able to go in now and physically interact with my fingers for the design. So if I want to make that bigger, I want to rotate it a little bit more, I want to tap on this letter, I want to bring that letter in closer and kind of turn it in, I want to make it a little wider or a little thinner. I can do those things with touch controls because Illustrator is enabled for touch. And that's great for anybody with a tablet or anything that has touch enabled, like for the Surface Books and all that stuff, this would be great for. So create your own custom designs this way. I'm not saying that I'm doing a great job here, but you get the idea. Touch enabled, Illustrator exclusive. Photoshop doesn't have that, not for type anyway. InDesign doesn't have that. So this is where Illustrator strengths really come in for people that want to do design work. Okay, next up, let's take a look at, switch off the Cintiq here. Let's take a look at InDesign. Now, InDesign, again, like I said, I started learning page layout before anything else. And InDesign has always been my tool, my go-to tool whenever I need to lay out more than a couple of pages, or actually more than one page. I'm usually going to go to InDesign to do it. Because InDesign is designed to do pages. Each document can contain up to 9,999 pages per document. So where Illustrator can have some artboards and Photoshop can have some artboards, InDesign lives to have pages. And yes, now even in InDesign, the pages can be different sizes in the same document. All right, so here we've got a multi-page document. The pages are always designed to go top to bottom. And where InDesign comes in to the workflow is basically look at InDesign as the tool you would use to bring it all together. You've done your photos in Photoshop. You got everything looking great in Photoshop. You've done all your vector work in Illustrator, and now you want to lay it out effectively on a page. That's where InDesign comes in. So for example, if I choose new document, just like we've been doing, I don't get artboards, I get how many pages do you want, because it's a page layout tool. Do you want those pages to be facing or not? So let's say I want to make wrong button. Let's say I want to make a 10-page document. We'll make a 10-page facing document. We can choose whatever page size we want or make it custom. And notice it's designed for more of a print workflow, but it can do web and mobile. So it will give me screen sizes instead. But let's say we're going to do this one for print. And we'll click OK. And now that's going to give me my 10 pages. They're all there, ready to go, all laid out like a book. And so unlike a word processor, or unlike even working with artboards in Illustrator and Photoshop, I'm designing this at any given stage of the design process. I can jump to page 5 and say, I know what's going on page 5. There's an ad that goes in the middle of the book, and I need to put that ad in right now because I've got it. Or I can go into, do a top-down approach. Go to page 1, page 2, page 3, whatever. I can rearrange the pages. The pages, like I said earlier, can be different sizes. I can do whatever I want with page layout. So how does this work? How do I get things onto the page from the other applications? Well, one of the easiest ways nowadays to do that is using libraries. So for example, now, and that's, again, this presupposes that you were diligent enough to put your Illustrator and Photoshop designs into libraries. But if you weren't, you can always go up to your file menu and choose place and go find those native files. I'm so used to not doing place from the menu. You can do place from the file menu and go grab your Illustrator native files, your Photoshop native files, and bring those right in. That's right. You don't have to save JPEGs. You don't have to save TIFFs. You don't have to save EPS. Illustrator and Photoshop native files can be brought right in. But like I said, if you use libraries, then it's just a matter of literally dragging things from a library onto the page. Now, it hasn't placed it yet. It's just showing me where it would go. And then I can say, oh, you know what? That should really be on page 3. I can drag it down on page 3 and tell it that that item goes there. Let's go back up to page 1. I need some text in page 1. And we're just going to put out a text frame there. We're going to type the word design. And I can, of course, use keyboard shortcuts to center that, to make that larger. And of course, then I can use whatever fonts and styles and whatever I want. So at this point, let's go ahead and use, we'll use Maceo Sans. And we'll just, actually we want to make that even bigger. Let's go ahead and make that, pull that down a little bit, give it some more room to play. And we're just going to go ahead and make that fill up that frame. Okay, so now that I got that text in place, that text is an object. So I can pick that object up, move it around, kern, track the type, do whatever I want to the type. There's new open type options here that if this had open type properties, we could go ahead and choose it. I can duplicate that just like any other object. I could change what this one says, change the font for this one. Let's make that one a bit heavier. And of course, change the colors and do whatever else I want to do. So InDesign and Illustrator are very similar to the way they work. Illustrator's got more drawing capabilities. InDesign basically has very few, if any, drawing capabilities and no photo editing capabilities. Yes, it has a few filters. Yes, it has a few things it can apply looks to, but it doesn't touch a pixel. It doesn't do any editing whatsoever. What else I was going to say? So again, if I decided later that, hey, I need to move that down, I want to drop in a graphic in here, I can go to my library and pull in, I'm just playing around here, but let's go get one of these. Let's pull, okay, we'll use this one. I've used this one a couple times before, but we'll use this one. It works here too. All right, pull that in. Now, of course, that one came in on top of everything. I can choose to keep it on top of everything or just right click and send it to the back. I could also rearrange it by putting it on a layer that's behind everything. Just like we do with layers inside Photoshop and Illustrator, we've got layers inside of InDesign. The difference with layers, and I know I'm getting into a lot of just random details, the difference with layers in Illustrator and InDesign, they are document wide. Whereas layers in Photoshop are more specific to the actual individual pixels themselves. So for example, I could make this layer and call this one background. And I can make another new layer and we can call that one text. And now, of course, I want to take the text and move it to the text layer. So it's on the text layer, take that text, move it to the text layer. So it's on that text layer, and so now when I turn off the text layer, the text goes away. If I twirl down the text layer, I can see what text is on it. So again, layers are all the way across all the applications, working with type all the way across all three applications. But, and again, I could design this page that we're looking at right now in all three applications. It just really depends on where you're going to go from here. If it's just a simple one-page design and it's for you, great. Make it in whatever application you're comfortable with. But once you go beyond that, you really have to evaluate what's the best tool to use. If I'm going to do a lot of drawing, a lot of vector art, probably going to do it in Illustrator. If I'm going to do a lot of editing with the photos and things and designs and knocking things out, probably going to do that in Photoshop. If I'm going to do something long form, more than a page, I'm 99% of the time going to jump into InDesign. Because even though I can make multiple artboards, chances are, if I'm talking pages, I want to do that in a page layout tool that extends the benefits of, and by the way, one more benefit real quick, and this is probably the biggest benefit for InDesign, is that across those multiple pages, so let's create a text frame here. And let's create one here. And let's create one here. Is that text can easily be linked between those multiple pages. So I can click here, link to that one, click here, and link to that one. And if I say show my text threads or show extras and then show text threads, we'll be able to see that linkage. So now if I wanted to put in some, I could of course fill that with regular text, but let's go ahead and just put in some placeholder type for now. And we're just going to go to our type menu, or is it under edit? I always forget. I think it's under type. Oh, we're going to fill with placeholder text. There it is, fill with placeholder text, and that will fill that with Sampum Lorem Ipsum text. And of course, now, if I decide that I want this one to be multiple columns, I can make it multiple columns. So let's, for example, turn that into 3 columns. And now that's 3 columns of text. Page layout tool, much easier to do page layout things. I want to make this bigger or smaller, pull it down a little bit, make that a little bit smaller, expand this one out more, make that one shorter. You know what? I decided that the graphic, the text should be next to the graphic instead. So changing my mind, much, much easier. I couldn't imagine trying to do this in Photoshop. Nowhere near as fast. Because as much as I love Photoshop, its strength is not doing page layout. So if you need to do this kind of work, that's what InDesign is for. InDesign is world's greatest page layout tool. Photoshop is not. And I see people doing page layout in Photoshop and Illustrator every day. And I just have a moment of silence for them. All right, so with that said, let's see, I'm sure I missed some questions, but I think the moderators were in there jumping in and answering them too. What about web pages using InDesign? InDesign is really not a web design tool. If I really wanted to do web pages, I would do them in Adobe Muse. That's what Muse is for. Now, could you design a page in InDesign and export it out as HTML and have a mess on your hands and then clean it up? Yes, but that gets back into it's not the best tool for this. InDesign has had attempts of making web pages in the past, and they've just never been good enough. So the InDesign team kind of shied away from making it do more web stuff. Now, it does have a web publishing feature for putting a document online. In other words, converting this to a non-reflowable, the word I'm looking for, non-fluid design, non-responsive page on the web. So it would take this and make an HTML page out of this, and it would make a document. That's the Publish Online feature, which I've also covered in a previous broadcast. Yes, it can do that, but that's a specific feature that's being hosted by Adobe that blah, 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 blah. It is not for creating HTML pages that you're going to host on your own site, mix with your own site, so forth and so on. It's for putting documents online. All right. Well, thank you, Rupert. Glad you were here live and glad you selected tutorials. Best tool for poster design. I would probably do that poster in InDesign because then I can pull together everything no matter what. Second choice would be Illustrator. Third choice would be Photoshop. If it's a one-page design, I would, like I said before, you can pretty much get away with any one of the three, whichever one you're most comfortable with. But for poster design, I'm probably going to still go to InDesign first. Because when you say poster, that means I'm going to have typography, I'm going to have images, and I'm going to want to be able to quickly and easily change my mind, move things around, and so forth and so on. So yeah, I'm probably still going to do it in InDesign. All right. My day is going great, Drew. How about you? It's been a busy day here at the home office. Yeah, it does depend on the poster, and yeah, you can do the poster in all three apps. So probably going to start with whichever one you're most comfortable in, but it really depends on, you know, if you're saying, what's my advice, I'm going to say InDesign. All right. Well, good. I'm glad I was easy to follow for you as well. Just making sure I don't miss any other questions here before I sign off. And I've got tutorials on InDesign and Photoshop and Illustrator on my YouTube channel as well as here on the Creative Cloud YouTube channel. There are lots of things to go watch. Well, not necessarily as many pages as you want. It depends on the application. So even InDesign has a limit. It's 9,999. So there is a limit. If I wanted 10,000 pages, then I would at least have to break it up into 2 documents. And there's nothing wrong with that either because it does have a book feature for managing multiple documents. All right. Text layout effects. It depends on what you mean by layout effects. All 3 applications have text effects. It just depends on how elaborate you want to go. Which program am I most comfortable with overall? Usually it's the one I spend the most time in, and that's probably Lightroom. I'm the most comfortable in Lightroom. I'm probably second most comfortable in InDesign, and third most comfortable in Photoshop. And that doesn't mean I'm afraid of any of them. It just means of all the applications that I can think of, those are the ones I've spent the most time in and doing the most things, and therefore kind of feel like I have a good handle on them. Illustrator is the one I spend the least time in because I don't draw. So therefore, when it comes to Illustrator, I always have to refresh myself on, oh yeah, where's that feature and what is that tool? Where's that tool again? So Illustrator is probably my weakest. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Jan. And with that said, I'm going to sign off. I'll be back on, I think, again Friday. Not on YouTube, but on Facebook, I believe. Friday, yes. I'm doing something on, oh yeah, I'm doing a Spark on the Spark page for Facebook. So facebook.com/Adobe Spark. The event is already there, and you can go ahead and set up a reminder for it. And of course, I'll be back here on YouTube next week. So cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. And if you have a topic you're interested in, put that in the chat. Let me know, let us know what you'd like to see in these ongoing streams, what kinds of tips and tutorials and things you would like to do. All right, so with that said, cheers, everybody. Take care. Thanks, and we'll catch you on the next one.